Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, David, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Still not watching the NHL playoffs. I just can't get into it. Sorry.
Uh-huh.
I understand that you have been watching.
Yeah, I started getting into it. It's the playoffs. I always watch playoffs. So it's yesterday there was 5 games and every one of them was close, and 3 of them went into overtime. I saw all 3 of the overtime, so I didn't watch every minute of every game or anything, but I saw a little bit of every game.
Some good games, I understand.
Yeah.
I have been following the Oilers news, though, as we continue to pick apart what went wrong with the Oilers season, and we'll talk about that on today's podcast. First, why don't we start, though? You're writing a post about some of the wingers that you've been seeing in the playoffs. Do you think the Oilers, looking down the list, who do you wish was on the Oilers now?
Oh yeah, they ran a poll on. I'm writing a somewhat facetious post about who I'm watching in the playoffs because I don't think there's much chance of any of these guys ever being Oilers again.
No, there's no
just
chance.
Because they're all ex-Oilers. But the point of the post is that for all that the Oilers didn't get much scoring from the wings this year, in recent years they've actually had some pretty talented wingers that they've moved along, and they've kind of flipped from in 2010. The whole future of the franchise was built around the hope of 4 young wingers: Taylor Hall, Linus Ullmark, Magnus PRB, Jordan Eberle. Hope. And in 2012, they moved on Linus Ullmark and brought in Nail Yakupov, at which point hope became hype. Well, I don't think anybody ever really enunciated that. But what happened was the Oilers suddenly became quite profligate in getting rid of wingers. It was like scoring wingers are the easiest thing to go and get in hockey. We so badly need defensemen and two-way centers and so on that we absolutely have got to go and get ourselves those guys, and we can fill in with help on the wings when the time comes. And so here's a list of guys I've seen in the playoffs, all wingers, all playing for other teams, and the last week in the actual playoffs since the play-ins. Taylor Hall, Jordan Eberle, David Perron, Patrick Maroon, Milan Lucic, Tobias Rieder, Drake Caggiula, Tyler Pitlick, and Andrew Cogliano. 9 guys that the Oilers up and got rid of, and obviously each is not created equal. Losing Tobias Rieder and losing Taylor Hall is not exactly the same level of catastrophe. But the fact remains that these are guys that are playing and seem to be helping out on other teams during these playoffs. And I mean, we're talking about, I would say, three fairly elite level scorers in there, in Taylor Hall, Jordan Eberle, and David Perron, all of whom have averaged over 20 goals and over 50 points per season over their lengthy NHL careers. Like, these are all 10-year plus veterans now.
Yeah.
And they're still playing and they're still scoring and they're doing it in the playoffs. And it just, so I'm just investigating a little bit. When did the Oilers move them? What did they get for them? What happened to that guy? What happened to that guy? And some of the trade trees, David, would make you weep.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, here's a classic trade tree. Jordan Eberle for Ryan Strome. Ryan Strome for Ryan Spooner. Ryan Spooner for Sam Gagner. Sam Gagner and 2 second-round draft picks for Andreas Athanasiou. So the net trade is Eberle and 2 second-round picks for Andreas Athanasiou. Nice trades, Oilers.
And now we'll let Athanasiou go so he can go to another team and become a star in the playoffs. I was, of those 8 players or 9 players, Bruce, I was upset with. There's 3 of them: Lucic, Rieder, and Caggiula, who I thought had. I was happy to see leave the Oilers. Rieder was ineffective with the Oilers. Caggiula, I thought, was a very weak defensive player with the Oilers. I mean, I wish they hadn't traded him for a terrible contract. But I don't know if he was part of the solution on the Oilers. And Lucic, of course, was when he was in Edmonton, didn't get it done in the playoffs, didn't get it done in the regular seasons 2 years in a row, was super slow. And his skills were replicated by other players, Cassian specifically. They just didn't need that kind of player. The other ones, it seemed like Chiarelli got rid of a good winger every single year. And that was going on before Chiarelli came. But, getting Hall, Eberle was run out of town. I contend Eberle was run out of town by a faction of the fans, faction of the media. And if I'm completely honest, I think the coach, Todd McLellan, had enough of Jordan Eberle after the playoffs that year. And there was also the cap issue. Do you have enough money to pay Eberle? Which was a reasonable issue, actually. Like that, this is the cap reality, and it did. There was a little bit of a crunch, although turns out they probably could have kept him one more year because the cap crunch didn't really hit.
They didn't use the cap space.
But he really was, Bruce. After that playoffs, there was lots of negative media commentary about Eberle. Many fans had turned against the player. Mm-hmm. David Perron, that's just a weird one. Like he was okay with the Oilers. He was good with the Oilers. Then he was okay with the Oilers, and then he got moved for a high first-round draft pick, which that trade tree will show turned into Griffin Reinhart. Right. Yep. We don't have to talk about the Taylor Hall trade. I hated both Pitlick. I didn't like either Pitlick or Cogliano, two useful young players going and getting back little in return. I mean, the Oilers were just such an inept freaking organization, like just forever. And Chiarelli, his proclivity to make the big move, the big wrong move, was, in the end, it was just devastating to the franchise, to the point where I think we're all kind of happy if Holland says he's going to be patient and wants continuity. It seems like a great relief just because of Chiarelli's cataclysmic moves.
Yeah, well, and that's going to be, the net bottom line here. He didn't make all of these trades. It wasn't him that moved Andrew Cogliano for a second-round pick, but it was, he certainly was the main culprit in making these series of trades over the years. And the bottom line is that they moved out some pretty useful wingers. Now, I mean, nowadays you can say Andrew Cogliano or Patrick Maroon are past their prime, and they probably couldn't help the Oilers right now, maybe, or would be very marginal players, but they were useful players when they left here. And the Oilers did not get a whole lot in return. One or two of the trades they did all right. I mean, for Lucic, I got James Neal. I don't know if they say they lost that trade on the
ice. I'd make that trade right away today.
Lucic, and you talk about Zach Cassian replicating his skills. Well, maybe so, but not in the playoffs.
Not this year.
Milan Lucic is playing 10 times as good as Zach Cassian did in this year's playoffs. I'm sorry to say it, but.
Yeah, and so I can't comment. Like, good for Lucic. I mean, I thought he could be valuable to some team that needed that kind of player, using him in the right role, not in I don't think he's,
They got him in a perfect
power forward. He's if you just want him to be an enforcer and play a bit, then that's kind of a usable NHL player. Like, he's costly, but he can still play in the NHL.
Well, he's on the line as a mentor to two greasy, young, semi-skilled guys in Dylan Dubé and Sam Bennett. In fact, I'd say fairly skilled guys, to be fair. They're not stars, but they're talented players, and they're greasy AF, both of them. And, of course, Lucic is there sort of to take care of that end of business so they don't get in too much trouble and they can stick their nose where it doesn't belong with impunity, because they got Milan Lucic minding the store for him, which was, a large part of the idea when the Oilers got him, I think. But it's frustrating to see him doing what the Oilers paid him big dollars to do here for Calgary. But it's not, and in a ways, I mean, the way his career came off the rails and the way I think he had some personal issues in there, I'm happy to see him turn it around. But for Calgary, it's a bit of a bitter pill. It's kind of a blessing.
He was brought in, as for the Oilers, is not as a bottom line kind of enforcer, but as a top line power forward, of course. And Hard for him not to live up to that, and hard for the team and everybody else, hard for the fan base. And it was clearly, I think, a good move for both Neil and Lucic. I like James Neil this year, and I'm glad to hear Milan Lucic just turned it around. He seems like a good guy, and so why not? Bruce, there's lots of, in terms of the big moves that Holland might make this year. We're not hearing a lot about forwards, although they might be looking to bring in a winger, of course, to play with McDavid. There's talk about that, or play with Draisaitl. But the main thing we're hearing about is goalie and defense. And I kind of dug into that a little bit in terms of there's some commentary going on this week about, what they should do with defense. I ran a Twitter poll on this after Brian Burke on Stauffer's show talked about trading one of the big four defensemen. He says he likes all of these defensemen a bit, Larsson, Klefbom, Nurse, and Bear. But his idea was, this didn't really work out. It's probably time to move one of them along and shake things up and make a trade. And a lot of Oiler fans are really against that idea. I'm personally not in favor of trading one of the top four, because I'm not convinced there's anyone on the roster who can step into the top four. It's easy to say trade one of your top four D-men, but we saw what happened, how that worked out with Tom Gilbert and Jeff Petrie, right? You trade guys who are currently in your top four. You don't replace them with a better player. You fail to do that, and it's a disaster for your team. So I'm not convinced there's anyone on the roster. But I'll just give you quickly the fan results, the fan poll that we had here. 2,600 people voted. Which top four D-men would you trade? Adam Larsson, 46%. Darnell Nurse, 29%. Oscar Klefbom, 5%. And not any of them, 20%. So I was in the not any of them category. But I'm definitely, in terms of both Russell and Benning, I think you must trade one of them to have a successful offseason. You've got to open up a roster spot for Caleb Jones, because he might not be ready for a top four spot. He's ready for a bottom six spot. And I think actually, the more I think about it, I'd like to see both of them traded to open up a spot for either Bouchard or Lagesson in the other spot. Excuse me, in the other spot. So what are you thinking along those lines, Bruce?
Well, Ken Holland said something the other day about Caleb Jones and how well he played when he was thrust into the top four when Klefbom got hurt in February, was it? And as I recall, he said something about the Oilers outscoring something like 17-10. Was that Holland that said that? Or anyway, somebody that I read that the Oilers were outscoring team by a nice margin during the games that Jones played up the lineup.
Yeah.
And I need to investigate a little bit further, but by memory, he got better as time went on, and it was during the latter part of his season where he actually got that chance with the extra minutes, and he made it. So maybe he's your top four replacement, and maybe if you have him in the top four over, a less mobile player. I mean, geez, Dave, I'm watching the playoffs, and every game Bruce. I know it's Miro Heiskanen or it's Quinn Hughes or it's Cale Makar just ripping the other team to shreds, and it's like some 21-year-old kid on defense. And you don't create those guys out of whole cloth, but if you got them in your lineup, giving them a chance is maybe not a bad idea. They did it with Ethan Bear, and it worked out not too bad this year. And they got a player there at least. I'm not sure he's a player of their ilk, but he's a player, and the game's changing, and it's.
Would you move Klefbom then, Bruce? I mean, or so if it's a left defense, that you're going to move. You see, it's very unpopular with many Oiler fans to say move Klefbom, but when we look at Klefbom's even strength, Bruce, when you look at his even strength scoring over time, and it's not just 1 year. Like I can see even strength scoring 1 year. Well, you say that's a pretty small sample size. When you look at Oscar Klefbom's even strength scoring over the last 5 years, he's around 100 in the NHL, roughly 100 ranking. I'll tell you where he fit in some of these years. Klefbom, in his best year, which was 2014-15, he ranked 65th.
Wow.
We have him ranked 116th in 2018-19. This last year, he was 119th for even strength point scoring. And in 2016-17, he was looks like 88th.
This is
So
points per 60?
points per 60, which,
Oh,
over time, in one season could be misleading, but we're seeing him. He's in the range. He's around the 100 range. So he's not top pairing. He's a middle pairing defenseman in terms of puck moving, but that's his forte, right? That's what he's known for, is the puck moving. I like, I don't see how you move Larsson unless he is in the last year of his contract, but he is a right defenseman, and he's a tough defenseman. And I also do think there's, maybe you move him, but I'm open. I wouldn't move Nurse, and I wouldn't move Bear. Nurse's points per 60 scoring. He was
good. Going better every
42nd
year.
42nd last year, 47th the year before that, 75th the year before that, and 68th. So there's a lot of people who criticize Nurse, and he had a really rough time in the playoffs defensively. He puts up the points. I think you keep him and Bear. And if you're going to move one of the top guys, I'm not going to pull out my no hair. I have no hair on my head. But if I did, I wouldn't pull it out over if they moved Larsson or Klefbom, if I'm completely honest, Bruce. I could, because Caleb Jones, I think he could be as good as Oscar Klefbom. I think he could give you everything that Oscar Klefbom's giving you at this point. Like, honestly, I think Oscar Klefbom is a good player, but he's not. I don't see him as a great player. I just don't. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots to like about Klefbom. I mean, all of it, some of it's all situations he plays: power play, he plays penalty kill, he
Yes.
plays 25 minutes a night, he plays 60 or 70 games a year, rarely 80. Like, I see him kind of in the Alex Edler mode of a guy. He's not going to thrill you with his offense, but he's going to chip in, and there's a lot that he does right. But untouchable. I mean, it depends on how you're going to replace him. Like, I'm not sure that, again. The thing is, you're right about the lefties. Those are the ones that are the big minute munchers and closer to the primes of their careers. And I'm thinking Larsson maybe is on thin ice, and for sure Chris Russell. I mean, if you get him moving and you got Caleb Jones in his spot, you're making cap space, and you're certainly making your transition game way better. Chris Russell has his charms, but great puck moving from his own end is not one of them.
I've said this is the alpha move. The alpha move for Ken Holland this summer is moving Russell. I mean, it's just, they've got to move Chris Russell. They've got to find a way to move Chris Russell, I think, because his skills are completely replicated by Klefbom and Larsson at this point. They've become, in their own way, versions of him, and in terms of being, penalty kill guys and shot blockers and that kind of thing. But Chris Russell his puck moving, it just isn't there. It's not close to being good enough anymore. And paired with Benning, then you have two guys in the bottom pairing are kind of so. And I would prefer to keep Benning over Russell, so partly because of cap hit. Right. But yeah, Bruce, I want to read you what Alan May had to say and get your reaction. Mm-hmm. So Alan May is a Washington Capitals commentator, longtime NHL player who had a cup of coffee in Edmonton. And he I thought, we've gone on and on and on about breaking up the dynamite line of Nugent Hopkins, Draisaitl, and Yamamoto, which I do still think was a profound mistake on the part of the coaching staff. Discombobulated the team is a big part of the Oilers losing. But outside of that, the one guy that got me thinking about the Oilers and said something that I hadn't been thinking about a lot was Alan May and his critique of the Oilers. So he said the Oilers just played the wrong style against the fast, wheeling, dealing Chicago Blackhawks. His argument was that the Oilers aren't a fast team. And that hadn't popped in my head because Holland had done quite a bit to improve the team speed of the Oilers. But, from May's eyes, he's not looking at, the Oilers before that were a lot slower last year and speeded up quite a bit. He's just looking at the Oilers compared to other NHL teams, which is which is a weakness of my own analysis. And he was going on about this lack of team speed. And he said, with the Oilers' defensive lack of mobility on their backside, they were exposed. You needed to have all your forwards back, especially the second, third, and fourth lines needed to be way better in getting back and protecting the house. Your goaltender is not going to be able to look good if you're not playing defense against a team like Chicago. And the Oilers don't have the speed to go back and forth. He then said you needed to shot block more. block more passes, get their bodies in the way, more takeaways, and they just didn't play the proper style. And then he zeroed in on the defense. And he said, the Oilers are not a fast team. They have some very fast players, but they are not a fast team. The defense is not that agile. It's not that mobile. Klefbom is a good skater. He's a different skater, but he's not a speedster. Darnell Nurse can wind it up, but he's not an agile guy. Ethan Bear is still learning how to play the game. He's not a high-end speed guy, in my opinion. And then the other guys, Russell, he doesn't have the speed. Benning doesn't have the speed to play the game. So you don't have to rely on a five-man unit of defensive play, and the Oilers didn't do that. So what did you think of that critique that Alan May made, Bruce?
Larsson, too.
He didn't even mention Larsson,
yeah,
the slowest guy.
Larsson didn't finish the series. He mentioned the 5 guys that played the whole series.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, the guy that replaced Larsson, Caleb Jones, was the most mobile defenseman that they got at the current time.
Yeah.
And Jones, Bear, I would say he's quick. Like, he makes good, quick decisions, but I wouldn't call him a speedster.
Correct.
And I think maybe he sells Nurse a little bit short. His agility is pretty darn good for such a big fellow. But, there's flaws in his game. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
But in terms of going to get the puck and quickly distributing the puck, the guy who's going to get to that puck quickest and move it the quickest, very possibly Caleb Jones out of the guys on the team, right?
Yeah, and then maybe Bear is good at it. Klefbom's okay at it. Like, Klefbom is he's kind of an okay skater. Like, some people like his skating more than I do. I don't think he's a fast skater though. I think I'd say a C+ skater. Ethan Bear, C+. With Caleb Jones being closer to a B+ or an A- NHL skater, and Nurse probably B or B+. I'd say B+, Darnell Nurse, and then Benning and Russell. Russell's still a decent skater, but not that effective making passes. And Benning is like a D skater in the NHL, and Larsson's the same. So it just really made me, like, for someone looking at this team from outside the team, from just looking at it, and this is like, look at that slow plodding defense. And it sounds like that's what's hitting you over the head. Because this was hitting us over the head for years. The Oilers' defense wasn't fast enough, and it sounds like still not fast enough, not even close.
Well, I sure saw Duncan Keith good in that Chicago series. Let's put it that way. I'm not sure the Oilers have anybody of that combination of speed and ability to move the puck, even at 37 years old. And I suppose probably wily enough to have his young partner Adam Boqvist do some of the legwork, but Keith seemed to be in pretty good control out there when he was on the ice. And I was never left with a real strong impression that any of Edmonton's defensemen was in control. Like, that would be like they were chasing a lot, and they were making unforced errors a lot.
Yeah, and the only way around that was in the regular season, Bruce. I think the Oilers got around that by playing as a 5-man unit very well most of the year, by having all the forwards coming back deep and working the puck out as a group. And I think they got more into that long bomb game again, shoot it up the boards, look for the long pass in the playoffs. Like, it was just, the whole team wasn't in sync, cohesive. So they didn't have that 5-man defense, this 5-man slot defense. They didn't have the 5-man breakout. And because they didn't have that, then the defensemen, like, the problems with them were compounded, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And that's how you end up giving up on average like 4 goals a game, which in the NHL is really atrocious. Like, honestly, you're not even in the ballpark. You're just so far off.
Mm-hmm.
So there was problems in the whole team being out of sync, but I think that Alan May unfortunately nailed something here. Now, do you think that there is so I think Holland has got to make room for Caleb Jones. Maybe he's got to make room for Caleb Jones in the top 4. But he's got to make room for him on the bottom of the roster. And again, I also think that Evan Bouchard had a pretty damn good year in the AHL. Jonathan Willis did a fantastic post at The Athletic recently where he looked at the scoring numbers of AHL players who put up that many points from their rookie season, like Bouchard. And those players, half of those players turned into outstanding top pairing NHL defensemen on the attack. It's a coin flip whether Bouchard is going to be that player or not, which is a pretty good coin flip to have. So I just think, Bruce, that I wouldn't mind if they opened up 2 roster spots, honestly.
Mhm.
One for Jones and one for Bouchard. I don't think it's that big of a risk, that big of a problem. Hey, listen, I have to got to hit the road here. Okay, sorry.
Yep.
We'll have to end it there, but we'll be back soon enough.
There'll be more hockey to talk about in due course. The hits just keep on coming, David.
Yeah. All right, Bruce. Thanks again for talking.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast. Now, where is this button? Uh-oh.